So Ben and I are co-founders. We go on the road a lot together, but what we almost never get a chance to do is talk to each other about our own backgrounds and how we found ourselves in this situation, because we're always like in go mode. So that's a little bit of what you're going to get today. We're going to weave in a combination of both of our stories with how AI is impacting the design review process. Before I jump into that, I'll just quickly tell you about LightTable, and then to the extent you are curious about that some more, we're happy to talk to you about it afterwards. But this is very much not a sales pitch, just conversation about what's happening with the design process and AI. But LightTable, we take PDFs of drawings and specs, we upload them, and then we use large language models and vision models to read the drawings as if they were architects and engineers. We flag errors and omissions in those documents and surface them to design teams. My background is in technology, and I'm the CEO. And Ben, you want to quickly just 2 seconds on yourself, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Yeah, my name is Ben Waters, co-founder here as well. Nice to meet all of you. And my background, I'm an architect by training, and of course, I'll tell you a little bit more. But
yeah. So I'm going to start off the questioning there. Ben not only is an architect, but he comes from a real estate family. I'm curious, Ben, if you could give us a little bit of your story.
Sure.
And how that started to wind you through the world of architecture and eventually to starting a technology company.
Yeah, absolutely. As Paul mentioned, by the way, like less park and bark, more conversational. So if questions come up along the way, please feel free to dive in. Yeah. So I grew up in New York City. My parents are both in commercial real estate. I wrote my first pro forma when I was 13, coming from that kind of background. And I grew up going to a high school that really fostered creative arts and got really into architecture. And when I told my parents I wanted to go to architecture school when I was 17, I think the unanimous disappointment was palpable. They thought they had won, but a precocious 17-year-old that I was like, I'll show you, I'm going to architecture school. And so I did. And got out of architecture school and worked at a number of big firms, both in New York and in San Francisco, Gensler and SOM, among a whole host of others. But I think kind of more importantly, like what I want to kind of leave with you guys with this story is that I worked at Gensler, and I remember like my dad was actually left architecture and went to management consulting at one point in time. So I had like all this like Six Sigma stuff rolling around in my head, like operational efficiencies. And so I went into my boss's office. I was like 23 years old, and I was like, tell me how I can do the best like job that anyone's ever done in this role, and like tell me the metrics for success and all this stuff. And as an architect, he's like, what are you even talking about? Like, we don't talk about things like that. But in any case, he's like, on this job, you need to figure out how you can eliminate as many change orders as possible. That is your job. As a project architect, an eventual project manager on this job that I was on, he's like, if you want to knock this out of the park, you need to figure out a way to create the best quality documentation you can create and negotiate with the GC and the entire team here and lead the consultants to a solution that ultimately was flawless.
So he set a standard for you of perfection.
Correct.
Basically, for those of you, I'm just curious, any architects in the room? Okay, a couple. I'm just curious, if you had a boss that said your job with these design documents is 0 change orders, how would that sit? Impossible, yeah. How did you take it, Ben?
I was 23, so I didn't know any better. I was like, okay, boss, let's go.
Yeah.
But I quickly learned, I'm working on that project, how difficult it would become.
Yeah.
It was an interior renovation project in Midtown New York on a retail department store. And so existing conditions, among other things, would pose difficulty.
Did you ever have a project where you had a lot of leniency from the client and a lot of time?
Yeah.
And you felt like you got to a point where the documents were really clean and almost perfect?
I did. I probably worked on like 150 different projects over my 15-year short career in architecture. But I had one client. It was a tech company, as you would expect. Budget was unlimited. We'd regularly tell them, oh, we can't get this for you. It's going to cost you $15,000 a chair. And they'd be like, no problem. Like, just send us the bill. Be like, oh, by the way, we need it next week. We'll air freight it. Okay, that's another 15 grand a chair. Whatever. Like, it was funny money. And so it was really this client that was like, okay, take the time to actually QA, QC. go through this checklist, really make sure that you've hit every single item on this, which by the way was 20 pages of like 10-point font marching down. And I remember sitting there with the technical director and like I had to initial every single line item on there. That was like, I actually went through this. But I think in my entire time as an architect, that happened once.
Yeah.
And it was a really unique situation.
So then fast forward, ChatGPT comes out, 2022.
Yep.
I think at that point you had your own practice.
I did.
And how did then that 15 years of practicing architecture and seeing ChatGPT lead to this idea of creating an AI company that can do this?
Yeah, they say like trauma like has a great way of forgetting, but I guess I didn't forget in this case. So like that change order idea was still in there. And I was running my own practice out of Seattle during COVID. I was getting calls all the time. People are like, you have to fix my kitchen. I can't live with this anymore. Like I've been staring at this thing for 10 years. Permitting in Seattle during COVID was like 16 to 18 months for like even a renovation project in a single family house. It was wild. And you'd go and you'd submit and you'd wait 6 to 8 months before you even heard back. And oftentimes you just get boilerplate responses back. So really put a big focus on having quality documentation from the outset, right? Wanting to like really submit and like having no, kind of similar to what I was doing on my first job. With that, it was just me. I was running this firm. I couldn't afford peer review as a company. I really like was trying to be nimble. And so I was like, okay, well, I heard about this thing, ChatGPT. Why don't I throw some drawings and some specs up there and see what I can get out of it? What's the worst that could happen? So I was like, think like a plan reviewer at City of Bellevue, and then submitted the thing. And what I got out of it was really impressive. Like even at that early stage, it was, this was ChatGPT 2.0, so it was just language at that point. We're not talking vision models at all. It was impressive. It was like, oh, by the way, the code that you cited is actually City of Seattle code. Whoops. Not City of Bellevue code. And then, oh, by the way, the fire code for Bellevue is different from Seattle. Like your fire hydrant here is not as close as it needs to be, so you need to sprinkler the whole house. Just a few examples, but like it was so powerful, even at that early stage where I was like, okay, there's something here, right? Like there's got to be a way to do this better, and I think we're onto something. Or I was onto something.
And that's where you and I met, and you described Ben described the peer review process to me as this impartial third party that comes in. And I think what you're saying is like, what better third party than a large language model that's read everything on the internet, including every architecture textbook, and has seen every set of plans that have ever been published by every city and county, and knows all the code, right? I got really excited about the idea of AI transforming how design review works because I come from the software industry. I spent 22 years building technology companies. And about 15 years ago, the way you would write code and then push that code to the internet and update your website, you'd go through a manual QA process. You'd have dozens, or in bigger cases, hundreds of people descend on the code base for like 48 to 72 hours before you cut a release. And you manually QA every line of code that's been written. You send the release out into the world, and the next morning you wake up and a third of the time your site doesn't come up and you panic. And sometimes you cost your company a lot of money. And the solution that the software industry came up with is they started creating automated QA, right? So the engineers would write QA that would then go check for the mistakes in the code. And as Ben was describing this to me, I was like, oh wow, look at this. Like, this is construction, the design and construction industry is just 15 years behind the software industry. And why can't we create automated QA? And so that's really what we have focused on here. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so on that note, I'm sure a lot of people in this room would like to know at least what our stance is, but at least kind of what we're coming at this from the perspective of, which is how is AI going to impact jobs, right? I know I'm an architect, we talk to a lot of different architects. Is AI, AGI coming for all of us, and are we ultimately going to lose our jobs as a result? Or like what are you hearing from some of the project teams that we've been working with?
Yeah, obviously to echo Ben, welcome the conversation on this topic because it's super interesting. I find people are falling into one of two camps. There's the Jack Dorsey camp, which you may have read. He just laid off 4,000 of his own employees at Cash App and Square. because he's like, we don't need as many humans doing these things. AI can do it. There was a recent survey that came out of CEOs in the United States. 9 out of 10 of them said they would not be making any AI-related layoffs in the next year. There was a Wall Street Journal article that recently came out and talked about how every single tech revolution in the last several decades has led to an increase in jobs, not a decrease in jobs. You'll squarely find myself and the LightTable team in the camp of these are tools that will unlock productivity for the industry and create opportunities, not eliminate them. The way that we've built LightTable is expert AEC oversight, so AEC, architecture, engineering, construction, people with 20 or 30 years working alongside the AI, because it's our view that you're never going to have a perfect software solution. You're going to want something that has real experts looking at it. So my prediction, for whatever it's worth, is this is going to be a real boom in productivity for the industry.
Yes, and yet it's not always a slam dunk when we pitch a customer, right? They come back and they say, I've done this for 20 years this way. Why would I change my methods now? Right. What can AI do that I can't? I've been staring at drawings for my entire life until my retinas have fried. Right. Like, what makes you think your AI can do what I can do?
We do hear that, and what we like to say is, okay, let's talk about how many sheets of drawings and how many pages of specs you have for this new development. 500 sheets of drawing, 2,000 pages of specs. Okay, great. When are you going to have a time to read through all of those? Would you like to load it up into the AI and come in tomorrow morning and all of it's been read and a couple hundred issues have been flagged? The AI has prioritized the issues and said, my prediction is these are the ones that are going to cause the most expensive change orders on the project. Start off from there. Now think about how powerful and productive you can be with that information at 8:05 in the morning versus, right. Oh, I just burned like 4 straight days trying to read through all these documents and I'm burned out now and I've kind of forgotten which ones I've checked and haven't checked. Yeah, I think this industry sometimes gets a bad rep for being slow to adopt technology, and I would push back on that. I've worked in products and software, creating a lot of tools for contractors. Contractors had a reputation for not being the first to adopt technology. But I'll tell you, when mobile came out, the adoption of mobile devices within the contractor segment far outstripped almost every other segment of the population. It's because it created real ROI. When you could be on a job site or in your truck and you have a mobile device and you're connected to your office, that created a ton of ROI for contractors, and that's why they adopted that so quickly. And I think AI will have a similar curve. Where it's creating ROI, you will see very rapid and quick adoption in the design and construction industry.
Yeah, I'll answer my own question here too, because we both spend a lot of time in front of the customer, but we always say, like, well, what's your rate of change order, right? Is it 5, 6, 7%? Is it the industry standard? Or sometimes we talk to some developers who have best in practice and they say, oh, we're more like 3, 2, maybe even 1%. Like, well, what would you say if we could cut that in half? What if we could say could cut that in half again? This is really the power of AI, and that's something that no human can do today, right? As it gets in there and it's able to really understand the documents in a way that a human today is limited in doing.
Yep. I'm going to ask Ben one last question, and then we'll open it up to the floor and see what questions you guys have about design and AI and what's changing in the industry. Ben, I'm curious if you could go a few years out and try to make one prediction of what's really, like, what change has really taken hold or taken root at a large architecture firm or a large owner developer that's doing multifamily or mission critical. Like, what's one thing you think technology-wise will have changed at those places?
Okay, so I'll tell a little story first and then I'll answer the question. So I think we were in front of a multifamily developer in Dallas a few months ago now. And he was a veteran of the industry, he had like 40 years of experience. And I said, Bill, like, what has changed in your 40 years as a developer in this space? And he said, when I first started, the sets were 8 sheets. Like 8, just 8 single drawings. Today, there are thousands and thousands of drawings. There's just like it's just changed so much as a result. I would say the dream so much of like a lot of the technology that's in the space today is that it brings the whole ecosystem together, right? Architect, consultant, developer, GC, and I can rattle off any number of different solutions that are out there, but that's really the dream, is to get back to a place where we're producing 8-sheet sets because there's trust and there's knowledge and there's an ability to really action on that, which we don't have today. There's so much litigious back and forth. And so I think what AI here is unlocking us to do ultimately in a way that's never been done before, because AI, even just in the past year, has come to a place where it can understand these drawings and suggest things on drawings that was never possible before, is it's going to bring back that collaborative nature into the industry, where the whole team can get together and collaborate on a platform that's enabled with a backbone of AI to find solutions to things that ultimately before would end up in litigation. And so I think this is really trying to drive the dream of LightTable, to drive the industry back to a place where it's much more collaborative and less finger pointy. I'll stop there.
That's great. Thanks for that.
Of course.
What questions do you guys have? What can we dive into? Topics that we didn't touch on that you would like to? Yeah.
Hold on, I have a mic for you.
Okay.
Maybe it could be helpful for you to give like a light, intro, like what does LightTable do? Maybe just like a few of the main features.
Yeah.
Sure. I think for,
Yeah. So we'll work primarily with developers and GCs, and they'll hire us on their project to essentially perform what a lot of people call a peer review. And when we perform a peer review, we can do it in a matter of hours to a few days. And it's 5 to 10x more comprehensive than a human peer review. But we don't, as I was saying earlier, we don't feel like we're a replacement for human oversight, but instead we just surface as many issues as we can. We prioritize them, and we kind of talk about it being shining a light on the design documents and looking for the sleeping giants that will become the $200,000 or $300,000 change orders. And we want to find those at 50% CD versus your 3 floors vertical, and you realize you have a conflict between your PT slab and your mechanical system.
So do you guys augment the clash detection process?
Yeah, I can take this one. So it's because we're only looking at 2D drawings at this point. Those are still the contract documents, and we're controlling for cost and for schedule. Ultimately, that's the contract, right? It's not the 3D model. With that said, a lot of the things that we find, so LightTable looks across 35 different areas of review or scope areas. Major ones there, coordination, constructability. On the coordination side, I'd say probably 20% of the comments that we find overlap with traditional clash detection. So I can give you an example. On a recent project, we found a comment where there was a hard lid, a ceiling at 8 feet. There's a light fixture in that ceiling, which is like another foot tall. And then above that in the ceiling was a big VAV, a big piece of mechanical equipment. And then above that was the bottom of the slab from the floor above. The AI looks at this, looks at the section, it looks at the fixture book for the light fixtures, it looks at the VAV and the specifications in the mechanical drawings as far as like how big this thing is. And it goes, wait, something's not right here. Like there's not enough headspace for all of this in that ceiling. So something needs to give. It can only glean that from the drawing, so it does start to move in that direction. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see in the future projects that are leveraging LightTable to its full potential, see a pretty drastic reduction in the amount of clash that needs to happen downstream and the trade-off from design team to GC.
So I have 2 questions. So you mentioned constructability. So can you provide an example of a constructability issue that
Sure.
You guys are able to work through? And second, does your peer review replace a traditional peer review that may be required by municipalities or lenders, or do you use that more of as a tool for the owner to get ahead of issues, though not necessarily replacing the traditional peer review process?
You take this.
I can take the first part if you want to take the second part. Okay, so The first one, constructability. I mean, sequencing of details is a big one. As it's drawn, you can't, like, how does this piece of, like, the window go in when this is already installed, right? So that's a big one. Logic of the detailing. I can give you a good example though. So part of our sales process is something we call a back test. And Paul mentioned kind of how the metrics we've been able to drive on projects. And of course, in this industry, you always get the response like, okay, well, I don't really believe you. I'm like, well, let us prove it to you. So we do this thing called the back test, and we run a past project through our platform. We produce comments on it, and then we link up the change orders that happened on that project to our comments, and we say we would have prevented X amount of savings. We did this on a project recently. It was actually here in Las Vegas. And we reran a project that had a major constructability issue as it pertains to thermal and moisture protection, placement of sealants. There was a double-silled drain. There was supposed to be a double-silled drain. Only a single-silled drain was installed. And as a result, the sealant was, and on top of that, the sealant was placed in the wrong place so that this tile on this roof terrace could not drain. This caused something like $27 million in damage to this apartment building. And it was something that LightTable caught as part of its review on this past review of a project. And so it's things like that, like we're, again, through that lens of ROI, we're looking for these major glaring issues that might come up.